And the session is about a special session that is behind my scenes on the experiences of His Excellency Lorenzo Angeloni. We have His Excellency Lorenzo Angeloni with us. He has graduated in law from the University of Perugia in 1981 and joined the diplomatic career in 1985. Since 2015, he has been the Italian ambassador to India and Nepal. He has written multiple books on Italian role in conflicts prevention in Africa, Algeria, as seen from inside, and books like The Quarantine, Italians in Sudan. The stories, non-fictions like In Darfur and The Perfect Crisis. In conversation with him, इनकी तो नाम में ही प्रतिष्ठा है, is Pratishtha Singh, who is a lecturer of Italian language and literature. She is an author, a poet, and an opinion leader. She has been a student and scholar of cinema in Italy and India, and also been a jury of a solo art film festival in Italy since 2009. Last year, she was nominated Godmother of the festival. Her travel experiences have recently been published in a best-selling book. I request Lorenzo Angeloni and Pratishtha to come forward on the dais and take the session forward.
We're sorry, it's slightly delayed. Well, with Lorenzo, actually, we will be talking about his experiences as a diplomat, his experiences in India, but it's most importantly about the book. So, like Madam said, that Lorenzo has written a lot of books, and he's written them in Italian. And recently, just this year, he got one of his books, a novel of his, translated into English here in India, and it was published by Bloomsbury, and the book is called Behind My Scenes, and I have it here in my hand, and in fact I wanted to keep it on the table. When the table comes, I will keep it. The book is interesting from many points of views, and we would want to talk about that. We want to talk about the idea behind the book, the idea behind the translation, and that too in India. But Lorenzo, we want to start off by talking most importantly about how diplomacy can be married to creative writing.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. So, as the theme is family, Prati started asking me something about marriage. And in this case, the specific marriage between diplomacy and creative writing. Actually, the book is a novel. I started writing at the beginning essays, reportage that were more, let's say, easy kind of writing for a diplomat. Then at a certain moment I converted myself in a very adventurous way, because I had no clue how to write a novel, but I had this, let's say, call to go for a novel and to share what I had to say at the end of my mandate as ambassador in Sudan in the form of a novel. So I'd like to get back to the opening ceremony when the anchor said that there is creative energy, around in a festival. And I think that really we all need creative energy. So, I mean, of course, creativity is the privilege of artists, namely writers, as we are in a literary festival. But I think that every work everyone should have creative energy. As ambassador, I can tell you I have to be very creative many times, even if ambassadors belong to another, let's say, sector of work, another kind of work, very. Sometimes it's administrative work, official work, institutional work. You don't expect too much, to find creativity in that environment. On the contrary, many times we have to be creative. We have to be creative to find a solution that both accepted for the parties. We have to be creative to overcome a bureaucratic obstacle, for instance. We have to be creative to when we interpret rules, laws. We have to be creative in many instances. So I think that we all need to to be very well connected with this source of creativity. Is very important.
What I believe is that I think any work, whether it is a diplomat's or an engineer's or a doctor's, can probably also be done without any special creativity. But I think if you do it creatively, then it adds that extra something to the work and redefines it in a more beautiful and I would like to call it extraordinary in many ways, in an extraordinary manner, and takes it one step ahead, right? That's what you meant, I think.
Yes, I agree. I don't know if extraordinary, but for sure unique.
Yeah.
So everyone has this opportunity because everyone has a different kind of creative energy. At the same time, I mean, we know how many different kind of books there are, how many different kind of writing there are. So it's the same for work. You know, when you are at work, you can be creative in a different way compared to your colleagues. So I mean, it's something very personal, and when it's really spontaneous, can be something unique.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for the table. Let's start talking. Yes, I was thinking of doing that. A little bit about the book and about the title of the book. It's called Behind My Scenes. And I mean, just to give you a little bit of the backdrop, the book deals with relationships, and because we are talking about family in the Literature Festival this year, the book specifically deals with a very important emotion associated with family life, with love life, which is heartbreak. And I think we all have gone through heartbreaks, or we've all known someone close who has gone through heartbreaks, and the book deals with that in a very special way, and I would ask Lorenzo to talk about it. But Lorenzo, also a little bit about the title, because it is really interesting that it's not behind the scenes. It is behind my scenes, as if there is a sort of a curtain in front of us, and there's something that goes on. So please.
Well, actually, when we discussed with the editor of the publishing house, she said, you know, I fear that behind my scenes is not English. And I said, okay, but it can resonate, it can resound something. Yeah, she said, I can imagine what you mean. Okay, this is sufficient. So, I mean, just ask to the main editor if he can agree on that, because these titles actually is very strictly connected with the story, because the story is the story of a couple, and the narration of the story is on the side of the male component of the couple. But in order not to be uneven, so I decided to create this character that tells this story from, let's say, a third position. In a certain way, he tried to look from behind, no, at the story. He looked from behind at the story. He looked from behind at his own involvement with this woman, and at the end, I mean, there is also, I mean, I cannot disclose everything, but at the end, there is the understanding why, no, this being behind my scenes. That was the reason, and I'm very happy that at the end Bloomsbury accepted to go out with a title which is not strictly English Oxford, I say.
No, and it's interesting, Lorenzo, that you said that I can't reveal everything you said. And I must read a little passage from the book, which is exactly on page number 6 of the book, so fairly early on in the book. And it is titled, The End. And that's like one of the chapters. And it's called The End, and it is on page number 6. And it says, October of a difficult year. Leave it, Giorgio. Let me go. I need new perspectives, new words, new horizons. You make me feel old. We have reached a dead end. Let go. Because if you don't, we'll be stuck, intertwined, and it makes no sense. No, because I don't love you anymore. Bare, dry words that hit me with a corrosive force. It is not the first time that she has used such harsh, incisive language with me. But this time, it is different. This time, these terrible words are not dictated by a moment's rage or as a reaction to my anger. They are awfully calm, focused, conscious. I hang up. I feel dazed. I lean against a wall on the street and stare at the marble plaque that reads Via della Scala. So close to her house and yet so far from her. Angelina and Adriano, seated at a small table a few meters away, observe me. They seem unsure what to do. I walk towards them, my legs shaking. I sit down and mutter something vague. They understand and do not take pity on me. I think of the letter I wrote to her and was just going to send her later in the day. I go back home and hurry up the steps. I climb up the 3 flights of stairs, take the letter out of the drawer and tear it up. And that is the end. And that is the end, or at least the formal end of the story, which the author gives to us on page number 6. And then he tells us what happens and how it happens. So do talk to us also about this choice of bringing the end to the front.
Yes. Well, you know, there are many kinds of agreement in life. So there are agreements to sell and to buy. There are agreements in my worth where you sign agreement, memorandum of understanding on many different technical things. And there is, according to many writers, there is an agreement between the writer and the reader.
Absolutely.
And according to this agreement, you have to be clear in a way or in another with the reader. So you have to guide the reader not to understand exactly how the story unfolds, but to understand what is your line of thinking, what is your truth through the reading. So why I decided to start with the end? Because I was not interested in narrating a love story or a story that was not working at all, or I was not interested in that. So I was interested in placing this story in a path of growth, of personal growth. So what you can receive after a heartbreak, you know, how can you interpret a heartbreak? How can you avoid to fall in depression, or how can you avoid to fall in these negative loops that sometimes happen, no, when you experience a heartbreak? And to do this, I just wanted to be clear that the story and how unfolded the story was not my aim. So just place it there and strike this agreement, so-called, with the reader. So, and that was why I decided really from the very beginning to start with the end.
That's very interesting. Well, the story, I must tell you, is about this couple, like he said. The male, who is also the narrator of the story, is called Giorgio, an Italian man. And the female, her name is Michela, or Miki. And of course, I have to ask you this, Lorenzo, about how much of Lorenzo is is there as Giorgio, because there are some aspects which seem so close to the work that you do, because he's a diplomat. So what do you have to say about the autobiographical character of the novel? That's exciting for us.
I participated to a number of book presentations, not only mine, but also others, also famous writers. And not a single one, or better, in every single reading that I participated at a certain moment, the person in conversation says, but tell me, how much of you, Stephen, Francisco, or other is in the story? So I mean, it's a spontaneous questions, and my answer is very simple. A novel is basically a fiction, but what does it mean, a fiction? So fiction means that you have a deck of cards at the beginning. You know where you want to go with these cards, but then you mix the cards in order that not everything is true, not everything is fiction. So, of course, there are elements of the life of the writer. Of course, there are elements of ideas, but of course, there are also elements of wishes, maybe things that the writer was not able to do, that maybe the writer imagined to do. It proved not to be able to do it. So there is, in this sense, there is some autobiographical elements, I think, in every novel, but it has to be clear that it comes in the middle of all the other cards. No, I mean, there are references, there are maybe small events. There are, in this case, there is Rome, which is the place where I grew up. The work of the characters, that is the work in the environment that I know better, because another important thing is when you write a novel, an essays, of course, but when you write a novel, you have to write a novel presenting an environment that you know. Yeah. You cannot invent, no, an environment. You can invent a plot, but you cannot invent an environment, settings, etc. So that's the kind of autobiographic presence in this book.
As far as you saying, you have been in conversation also with very famous authors. I mean, I know how famous you are. You are one of the most. He's one of the most, and I know, I mean, probably out of modesty, he would never, I don't think he'll even agree to this, but he is the most dynamic Italian ambassadors we have in any country across the world right now. I know this. He is the only one who has a huge public presence and tries to do lots of interesting, innovative, creative things. Also within the ambit of the work that he does, has a website dedicated entirely to the exciting things that he does, lorenzoangeloni.com. So yeah, I mean, there are things that one likes. But as far as, again, the book is concerned, there is a lot of myth busting also that is happening in the book. One common myth, which is a very concrete, very basic myths in the country also, is related to how men don't suffer the way women suffer. Mard ko dard nahi hota, right? That's a very famous saying in Hindi, Lorenzo, and it means that men don't suffer. And in fact, there's a film or a song about to come or already released recently that talks also about this, how men also probably do suffer. So do tell us about Giorgio. He comes across as a well-intentioned, naive person who's extremely intelligent and yet suffers.
Yes, let me make a step back and then I come back to this just to share with our friends here why I decided to translate first this book because it was presented in Italy before many years, well, 2010. And what then convinced me, no, to go for a publication in India. So after my arrival, some months after my arrival, I read an interesting interview on the Mint. The man interviewed was Dr. Siam Bhatt, who is a notorious psychologist based in Bangalore. I don't know why I started reading this article, but the core of his message was about heartbreak. And he said, the central message was, we are not prepared for the extreme trauma and turmoil that heartbreak can cause. Neither homes nor schools teach us to deal with it. So, and of course, you can imagine that I couldn't agree more, because I had inquired this theme before writing the novel. And then suddenly I said, well, if this psychologist, very well known, I mean, just state this on an important newspaper like The Mint, so maybe there is space for my book to be presented, because the novel, this specific novel, I think it belongs to the kind of message novel. No, you know that there are message films, and there are also message novels. So I mean, novels, not essay, but novels that can bring about specific specific messages. And for messages, I just refer to situation, to words, to something that suddenly has the force to shed light to our doubts. So that's why I decided to enter this, to enter this adventure of translating, editing, and then publishing with Bloomsbury. Sufferance. I think that, at least in Italy, but I imagine here is more or less the same. I live in India. I've living in India for 3 years and a half, so a little bit. I started to know something about this country. When there is an heartbreak, I mean, when a story is over, of course, both parties are in sufferance. So that's, I'm not saying that men are not suffering. Men do suffer, but often men do not show. No, the education that we have, and in this we are really very similar. Italian, let's say, education is very similar. So you are a male, you are a boy, you cannot suffer, you cannot be emotional. Otherwise, you are not considered, I mean, a strong boy or a strong man. But this is, of course, this can have some disadvantages also, no, in terms, because you don't know where this sufferance is going, no, because sufferance is there. So as there is this common situation, I decided to try to sketch a character, male character, that first of all, before suffering, it really tries to understand. No, it really tries to understand how to keep this relation alive, how to avoid the heartbreak. No? I mean, it's in really looking around, let's say 360 degrees, no? Trying to find solution. And then after the heartbreak, try to give a sense to that, no? Not abandoning himself to depression or not reacting with violence, but trying to give a sense to understand what kind of experiences he just went through. And I also like to add something which unfortunately, and I underline unfortunately, happened in my country, in other country, but I refer to my country because I know better. But there are too much often cases where relations end with the man killing a woman. It happens often in Italy, and this is a very bad thing. And I think that sometimes sufferers can find this way out, which is really terrible. And I think it's important, especially in this phase where many things are changing. This morning we were talking about the importance of consolidating family, how it's important to consolidate family. But to consolidate family, maybe you have to consolidate a couple before, no? You have to grow better and grow more in understanding the nature of the couple, understanding how better to cope with the other sex. So all these things are strictly related, and I think that we have to give some thought on that, no? Because as Dr. Bath said, so neither school nor family can help us many times, no, to cope and with the heartbreak, and especially to understand what next, no, what happened next.
Well, from whatever we've spoken so far, I just got a feeling that the book comes across as this really sad sob story of people just crying. That's not what it is at all. In fact, that is one thing that I really liked. I finished the book in 3 hours. It is a very short read. And this is something that, again, I want for Lorenzo to talk about, is about the genre itself. It is not that typical novel. It is somewhere between a novel and a poem, it almost seems, because even visually, sentences end in a certain way, new paragraphs begin, and the description also is not that age-old description of he lived there, he went there, it's not that. It's something much deeper than that, and therefore that depth takes away the the cry parts of it. It takes away the Greek tragedy of it. What remains is just the essential emotions and the feelings of these two. So to tell us about the genre also. It seems like you've tried to play around with the classic novel.
Well, my intention was to imagine, or let's say to come up with the kind of writing, bearing in mind the situation of the title. So writing, so the character is behind his own scene, okay? So what happened when you are behind the scene? So many times you don't have a clear picture of what is happening in the theater. Sometimes you see just a portion. You are in the dark, mainly, no? And when you are in the dark, you often tend to either to be scared or to be in contact with very, deep, sometimes thoughts or part of yourself. So that's why the writing came up like this. I mean, it's sometimes very short sentences, sometimes going immediately down deep to feelings that are really, I don't know, I would say down to the first chakra, inside the belly, or we in Italy, in the Italian language, say is something that is really inside your guts, your belly. I mean, it's so that's the reason why it came up like this. And then, of course, I mixed a little bit also the narration with some small poetic touch. The moment that it seemed to me proper. So when in the part of the story that was going very well, and at the end, at the very end of the book, not at the end as paragraph, after, let's say there is the last paragraph is called, the last chapter is called After, and then there is also a very sad resume of what happened in a poetic form. This is the reason why these styles are mixed in this book.
That's very interesting. This is the first time you've talked to me about the behind my scenes ideology, and we have spoken about the title earlier. Anyhow, so I remember when the book was actually launched in Jaipur, and there were lots of young people like there are in the room today, and a lot of them were curious about how, you know, us as Indians would be able to relate to emotions of an Italian couple, Giorgio and Amiki. How will we be able to relate to them? And when the novel was launched in January, I had not read it yet. I read it recently, and I could not only relate to the female protagonist, Mickey, I could also relate to Giorgio. And there were so many points in the novel where suffering or emotions or happiness and joy it transcends the idea of gender totally. And of course, I, being an Indian, obviously related to all of that, so clearly even that tells us that emotions kind of bind us stronger. So that thing that you were talking about, Lorenzo, the Vasudev Kutumbakam, it is not just because we all have a sense of humanity, but I think we are also bound to each other by threads of pain, of joy, of other things which are same, right? And also, by the way, that brings me also to the cover of the novel. When I first saw the cover, which was sent to me before the book was released, I thought it was a fantastic cover, because when you look closely at it, you can't tell if that man is a European guy, it's an Indian guy, you can't really tell. It's someone's back. And so therefore it already tells you that the story does not belong to anyone and therefore belongs to everyone.
Yes, you know, when you touch a theme like love, pain, sufferance, growth, you are in a universal sphere. So, meaning that everybody has to go through this. Oh, fortunately, not has also that has the possibility to go through this, because of course love is a beautiful experience. So that's why maybe you have this perception of not having a particular favorite position for one or for the other, because actually this is not the purpose of the book. So I mean, the purpose of the book is not to demonstrate that the male character is the one that at the end was I mean that he was right. No, it's not this. So the purpose of the book is demonstrate or trying to pass a message, because demonstration is a too much big word. That is possible to react in a different way to heartbreak. That is possible to be a little bit less egoic, in terms of to have the strength to look at the other, the partner position. And I can tell you this is another point in common between writing and my work, because my work is basically based on this. So you have to be able to look with the right distance, but at the same time with the right closeness, with the right empathy to the point of view of your interlocutors. So in diplomacy, you find yourself many times in situations like this, where you have to stick to your position, but you have at the same time to take into consideration the position of the other if you want to get to a way out, which is good for both, because at the end you cannot win alone, no? I mean, so you have to win always together, so especially in many situations that presents. So this attitude is valid for my work and for many other works, and I think is valid also for a positive building, let's say, confidence building attitude in a couple.
Well, before we open the floor for questions from the audience, who I'm sure they'd have questions about heartbreak, I have another...
Not Dr. Bath, anyway.
No, but, well, you've written the novel. letters, Lorenzo, and how the book is a series of letters, you know, also, which he writes to her and she writes to him, whether they are emails, they are letters. Please, because there's a very young audience, and I don't know how many letters they write. I just want from us oldies, we should probably talk a little bit about the idea of letter writing and the meaning.
Well, letters for a man of my age, meaning when I was at your age, was something common. I was used to write a lot of letters, and I received a lot of letters. I studied.
We are sure you got lots of letters.
I studied in my place in Italy is Perugia. Perugia is a small town between Rome and Florence, which are most known. But Perugia is known for the most important university for foreigners. So meaning that a lot of young students, they were coming to Perugia to learn Italian. And with a good number of them, then you establish a relation, friendship, and then, of course, the occasion to write letters was always there. So for me, writing letters when I was a student was something common. Maybe every day I was writing and receiving letters. So when I started thinking to the, let's say, the setting and the structure of this novel, I recall that times, and I joined that remembrance with another point that I find interesting. So how to contaminate the technology that we have around, no, with some touches of the past. No, you know that there are now the concept of vintage that is growing. No, is going on. Yes, because vintage is exactly this. No, I mean, okay, we have I mean, in untiring development of technology, but from time to time we retrieve something, no, from the past in many sectors. So I just wanted to do more or less the same. So imagining that in this era, because the novel is written and the plot developed in the I mean, technological era where the character already used as telephone, as mobile phone. Imagining that these two characters living in two different houses, not far away, in the same part of the city, they could also have communication through fine paper, fine letters paper, and the act of putting the paper in an envelope, sealing the envelope, going to buy a stamp. By the way, I went that period to be certain. I went to buy stamp asking, sorry, the stamps are still available? Yes. And they said, yeah, don't worry. How many you need? No, I don't need. I just wanted to know if they're available or not, because when you write a novel, as I said before, you have to tell the truth. You cannot invent things. So, and that was the idea, no? I mean, that's a small contamination of the past in the present under this form.
Great. I remember very recently I was having this conversation with someone on the, I was texting this person, and he said, if you're free, why don't you just call? You know, why are you texting? And I said, I can reread the text. And it's such fun to reread. Letters had that fun, right? And which letters and emails have, which conversation it just goes away. They're words, right? They fly away. Well, thank you so much, Lorenzo. And the book is fantastic. It's available downstairs at the stall. And if you eventually want to get it signed, Lorenzo is here. I want for us to, open the floor and ask you people to come up with your questions related to the book or to the theme of the festival. And thank you very much. You've been a great audience.
I'm afraid I'm yet to read your book. I surely will. But it's generally known that Italians are like Indians, where family is very important. Everything is family oriented. They live in large numbers and joint family system. So you now working and living here in India, what kind of dissimilarities do you see? Dissimilarities. Just putting you in a fix.
Well, I have to be honest, I tend to look at similarities. This maybe it's the excess of my profession, but I find fascinating to discover in another part of the world, because I mean India is definitely in another part of the world, how many points in common Italian and Indians have, to the point that I can tell you is something that sometimes I always say to my colleague, but shouldn't be repeated out of this room. I find myself better in communication with people of a country like yours than sometimes with people coming from Northern European countries. So I feel easier. I feel sometimes I feel that we have the same sense of humor. So we have a completely different sense of humor with people coming from, I don't know, Denmark, or so that they are very, very good people. I mean, I am not saying that they are not, but as Italian, as Mediterranean, so I feel easier to relate with maybe people of the southern part of the world. I don't know, but maybe it's not only this, as you said. Family is really an amazing example, because of course family are everywhere, no? I mean, one could say, well, I mean, there are mamas and father and everything everywhere in the world, but the way that mamas and no, the role of the mother, no, and the way that mother consider kid, their son, even they are grown up or mature grown up, or even they may be now 60. So I think it is not so common in the world. So I mean, this belongs to very few countries, and sometimes also the interference that there are, no, in the family, many people that want to have a say on everything. So I mean, it's typical. It's typical also of my country. Many other countries are going towards a much more individualistic solution. I remember, for instance, when I was a student, I met a lot of people coming from Northern Europe that they were, and I really envied them. They were a sabbatic at 18, 19 years old, so between school and college, and sabbatic from their family also. They were just traveling for 1 year. So it's a very good habit, of course, but it also means other kind of organization. I'm not saying that our is better. I'm just saying that our is similar.
Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to ask you, you are an Italian ambassador and you slowly are going into writing fiction. So you've written many books, right? And when was the point did you consider yourself as a writer?
Well, it was a very specific point in my life, in my professional life, in my life as a writer. It was after my first ambassador post. I was ambassador in Sudan for 4 years, and a lot of terrible things happened there. A lot of, violences, war, a lot of displaced person, the UN trying to help. So were 4 very intense years. At the end, I wrote a reportage, and I was ready to send to the publishing house. At a certain moment, I stopped, and I said, no, I don't want to write for people that already know what's going on. I want to reach other people. I want to reach young people. I want to pass messages on what every one of us can do to tackle war, for instance, no? Not necessarily being on a theater of war, but also in his own life. The what I had collected there was very strictly related to these ideas. So I tried to, I stopped this, I put aside this reportage, I reconverted all these materials, I worked for 2 more years, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to, let's say, a professional writer, somebody who is now one of the most sold writer in Italy, is Gianrico Carofiglio. And this very gentle man told me, listen, this is good, this is, maybe you can do this another way, this is okay, perfect, the dialogues, I like it, so started. And it was a great satisfaction because I really, for 2 years after this book was published, I make a tour of the Italian universities on the Saturday, because I was working as a diplomat from Monday to Friday, and I organized a number of tours in Italy to present this book to young people, and it was really very well received because it was bringing a lot of interrogation also mark, no, on what we can do in our specific life to tackle war. So that's the great question that lies down this first novel. That's, by the way, has been translated also in English and is available on Amazon Kindle with the title "The Perfect Crisis." Yes, The Perfect Crisis. Yes.
Hello, sir. I'm pretty sure as a writer and an author, you must be facing many challenges. So what advice would you like to give to us young authors who are up in the field of writing or who want to make a career in writing?
Well, I'm not a professional writer in order that I went through school of writing or all these experiences that usually the people that make this for a living have gone through. But I deal with writing since long now. I think that the most important thing is to be curious. So to be curious, just to snoop around. And then to understand what attracts more your curiosity. So, and then cultivating this curiosity. So even if it's not for a living, but every one of us has something that catch our own eyes, his own eyes. So it's natural. So and once that you start having this perception of curiosity, and once that you start digging in something, so then it happened that at a certain moment you collect impression, information, and all that, and maybe thinking. The second is what a very, very famous writer said, is Stephen King. Stephen King says, doesn't matter what you write. The very important thing is that you tell the truth. And I refer to the concept of truth that I was touching before, no? The agreement with the reader. So this kind of truth, you have to be honest, sincere, and telling your truth. So that's the truth that is important when you write a novel, when you write a book. Your truth, but you have to be honest with yourself. So, and then the third point is, again, we touched before, a novel, a fiction, is not an invented thing. Even if you are, talking or referring to fantasy, the style. No. There is a structure. So, and you have to know, you have to be competent. You cannot just inventing. You invent the plot, as I said, but you cannot invent the setting. This is very important when you want to write something.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
There was this little closing remark that I thought I wanted to make, because we are talking about family and we are talking about relationships. And this morning when we had the opening ceremony, there was the beautiful sand artist who made a family on, and that made me thinking. It got me thinking. I started thinking, I think we need to redefine the very idea of family having, the Article 377 having been taken away. But also, apart from that, there's so many times when our best friends are our family in so many ways, when we are living away from home, when our parents are away or something like that. So I believe that as young people, as forward-thinking people, young or not so young, and that precisely is also the novel in some ways for me, because it transcends that whole idea of family, and yet relationships, bonds are very strong. But family per se, the way it was intended at one point, has been redefined. So maybe we have to kind of reanalyze and re-understand the new structure of family. Thank you.
So we have one more last question from the
Okay, we have one last question in two sections. So the first part of the question, sir, you see yourself more as an ambassador or more as a writer? Given a choice, what would you be?
The first.
First.
Well, I see myself as an observer. I see myself. I use different lenses. I see myself as a person that try to be useful, and you can do this both, being ambassador, being writer. You can. So I don't have a preference actually.
That was not diplomat, but diplomatic. And second one, about your next book. Is there a book coming up, and on what lines, and what is the subject?
I'd love to write something on India. So, but I'm not yet prepared. So I have to be here longer. Maybe I have to know better. I'm not referring to the history or no, but I have to collect more because for a foreigner. So maybe I can tell you this as a final note. For a foreigner living in your country, so we collect such an enormous amount of suggestions, of impressions. So India is it's a very warm country. Wherever you travel, here or Mumbai or Delhi, so there are plenty of situations which are really for a foreigner very interesting. No, we really like to be there, to dig more, to understand. So it's so many diversity in your country, so many languages, so many different situations, so many religion coexisting. So it's not easy for a foreigner to absorb all that. So when I arrived, I made a tour with visiting other ambassadors that were there since long, and many of them, actually, I discovered that the wiser of them, they told me, don't worry. So don't feel not prepared for India, because you will feel the same in 4 years when you will be at the end of your mandate. So it's a huge, beautiful, extraordinary country, and that's why I hope one day I will be ready and able to read something, but I need proper preparation.
Wow, sir, we will wait for that
one
for
question,
sure.
just one question. How about international affairs? Do you intend to write any book on, say, after you retire as a diplomat, on all the experience you are gathering throughout the world, Sudan, India, Nepal, and maybe other countries?
To some extent, I already done it, but I'm not thinking on the concept of retirement, because, of course, at a certain moment, a diplomat as a public officer has to leave his own activity. So I have 5 more years ahead, but I'm not thinking to this moment as a retirement. It will be maybe a development. So a development towards something else, and I can guess that there, coming back to your questions, I will be a writer for good, maybe, and having, of course, also the possibility to expand many themes, because, of course, I'm anyway a public officer, and I have to take into consideration this aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everybody.
It's
Thank
very
you,
lovely.
Lorenzo, for this dynamic session. Because people like you inspire us, in spite of being a high political profile, a career, and you have this creativity and the juices flowing in. And thank you, Pratishtha, for giving us tidbits of the book, which will kind of intrigue us and make sure that we read it.